Class, this slide is establishing the scale of construction. $10 trillion globally, and 100 million people employed worldwide. That tells us construction is not a small sector. It is one of the biggest engines of the global economy. Now let me ask myself, if we are this large, why do we still struggle with delays, cost overruns, and inconsistent productivity? The slide answers that through the industry's core characteristics. Construction is highly fragmented, meaning there are many companies and most are small. It's also project-based, so every job is unique. It's on-site production, meaning we build in uncontrolled environments, weather, site constraints, logistics. And notice the business reality. Low profitability, often 5% or less. That means firms are constantly protecting margins and may hesitate to invest in new technology. Add low R&D investment and a conservative culture, and we get an industry that is huge but slow to modernize. So my question becomes, how do we manage projects effectively in an industry that is complex by nature? That is exactly what construction management is about. This slide makes a strong statement. Construction is one of the most critical industries, yet the world still has major infrastructure deficits. It highlights three categories: demographic pressure, the infrastructure crisis, and global deficits. Let me ask, why does population growth matter to construction? Because population growth and urbanization mean more demand for housing, roads, water systems, schools, hospitals, and power infrastructure. The slide notes that 70% of the world's population will live in cities by 2050, and global population is growing toward 9 billion by 2040. Now look at the deficits. 1 billion lack clean water, 1.4 billion lack electricity, and 2.6 billion lack adequate sanitation. These are not abstract numbers. These are real human living conditions. And the U.S. example is important. America's infrastructure grade is shown as D+, which tells us even developed nations are struggling to maintain what they already built. So I ask myself, if construction is the solution, why are the problems still this large? That question sets up the need for transformation. This slide is a headline slide, and it is meant to hit hard. $56 trillion in global infrastructure investment is required over the next decade. Now let me ask, why does a crisis become an opportunity? Because unmet needs attract funding, political focus, and innovation. The world has to build and rebuild massive infrastructure systems, and that creates one of the biggest construction pipelines in history. But the slide adds something important. The industry's conservatism and lagging technology adoption make it ripe for transformation and disruption. So here's the teaching question I ask myself. If the world needs $56 trillion worth of infrastructure, can we deliver it using the same slow, fragmented, traditional approach? Probably not. Which is why the next slide starts talking about changing the delivery model itself. This slide compares manufacturing and construction, and this is a major learning moment. In manufacturing, the process is repeatable. Design, fabricate, store, sell. Products are built in controlled conditions, and customers pay when the product is complete. In construction, the process is phased. Preliminary design, final design, construction, ready for use. Payments happen across phases, and the work happens on-site with uncertainty. Now I ask myself, What is the biggest difference here? It's predictability. Manufacturing scales because it repeats. Construction struggles because it reinvents the wheel. The slide asks, how can construction adopt the efficiency and scalability of manufacturing? That leads us to ideas like standardization, modularization, prefabrication, and repeatable systems. So the key takeaway I want students to remember is, the future of construction management is not only managing labor, it is managing systems. This slide gives us a market snapshot of 2025. It shows that construction spending is enormous, $2.1 to $2.2 trillion annually. That's the demand side. But the constraints are equally strong. 439,000 workforce gap, 35 to 40% material costs above pre-pandemic baseline, a market pulled in different directions. Let me ask, how can spending be high but projects still feel difficult? Because the constraint is not demand, it's delivery capacity. The slide also shows growth drivers like federal funding and reshoring, but it lists top challenges: labor shortage, high interest rates, and urgent need for tech adoption. So my teaching question is, when costs rise and labor is short, what happens to project performance? Schedules slip, bids increase, risk rises, and the manager's role becomes even more important because the margin for error becomes smaller. This slide explains the K-shaped construction market. The idea is that some sectors are growing while others are declining at the same time. The upper arm, growth, includes public infrastructure, manufacturing, data centers. The lower arm, contraction, stagnation, includes office, traditional retail, single-family residential. Now I ask, why does construction behave like this instead of moving together? Because construction is not one industry, it is multiple markets with different drivers. Public work is driven by government investment and policy. Manufacturing is driven by reshoring, energy transition, and national competitiveness. Data centers are driven by AI and cloud growth. Meanwhile, office and retail struggle due to changing lifestyles and economic shifts, and single-family slows when mortgages and affordability worsen. So the key lesson is, construction managers must understand which market they are operating in, because risk and opportunity depend on sector. This slide shows the funding engine behind the boom. IIJA, $1.2 trillion, roads, bridges, water, broadband. IRA, $783 billion, renewables, retrofits, battery plants. CHIPS, $280 billion, semiconductors and research. Now let me ask, why does federal funding matter so much to construction? Because it creates stable demand, especially when private development slows. It also determines what gets built: transportation, energy, manufacturing capacity. The slide also notes peak spending around 2025 to 2026, meaning contractors are positioning themselves now. But here's the key question. Does funding automatically guarantee successful projects? No. Funding creates opportunity, but delivery depends on labor, supply chain, permitting, and project management discipline. So the real lesson is, money is fuel, management is the engine. This slide shows where growth is happening. First, manufacturing construction has tripled since 2019. That's a major shift, driven by semiconductor fabs and EV battery plants. Second, infrastructure modernization is active. Roads, bridges, water pipes, airports. funded largely by IIJA. Third, data centers are described as the new gold rush. The slide highlights that projects have grown from typical 20-megawatt facilities to campuses exceeding 500 megawatts. Now I ask, what does this scale increase mean for construction managers? It means bigger budgets, bigger risk, and higher complexity, especially for MEP systems. And the slide says something critical. Power availability is now the #1 constraint. So my question is, what happens when the critical path is not concrete or steel, but the electrical grid? It forces earlier coordination, earlier procurement, and stronger stakeholder management. Now the slide explains why private development slows down even when there is demand. It points to high interest rates, around 5% benchmark, persistent inflation in materials like steel and cement, rising labor wages. Let me ask, why do interest rates affect construction so much? Because private development depends on financing. If borrowing costs rise, many projects stop making financial sense. The slide also explains that wages are rising 4 to 6% faster than the general economy, which permanently raises the baseline cost of building. The key takeaway is that expensive capital plus inflated costs push marginal projects out of the pipeline. So my teaching question is, when projects are shelved, what happens to contractors? They compete harder, margins tighten, and risk increases. This slide shows how slow sectors respond. Single-family residential is slow because it is mortgage rate sensitive. Multifamily is cooling after a boom and oversupply issues in some regions. Commercial real estate, especially office, continues to struggle. That leads to adaptive reuse, converting office buildings into residential or mixed-use spaces. Retail is also shifting from enclosed malls toward mixed-use and warehouse formats. Now I ask, what does recalibration mean? It means the market is adjusting, not disappearing. It's shifting to new patterns of demand. And here's a good teaching question. Is adaptive reuse easier than new construction? Not always, because existing buildings come with unknown conditions, structural constraints, and code challenges. So lower arm work can still be complex and valuable, but it requires a different strategy. This slide is the labor reality. 439,000 additional workers needed in 2025. The workforce is aging. Median age, 42. 53% retirement cliff within the next decade. Recruitment challenges. Only 10% under age 25. Now I ask, why is labor the universal constraint? Because every sector, public, private, industrial, depends on skilled labor. The slide lists direct impacts. Project delays. 45% of firms report delays. Increased bid prices. Higher safety risks due to inexperienced crews. So my teaching question is, if labor is scarce, what happens to productivity and safety? They become harder to maintain, and managers must work even harder to plan, train, and control quality. This slide explains how the industry responds by multiplying productivity through technology. AI and data, generative design, schedule optimization, safety monitoring. Robotics and automation. Robots for layout, drywall, rebar tying. Exoskeletons, reducing fatigue. Industrialized construction, MMC, prefab. Shift from stick-built to off-site assembly. The slide highlights benefits like 30 to 50% faster completion, cost certainty, and improved safety. Now I ask, why is this inevitable? Because labor shortages and complexity force the industry to modernize. And the key teaching question: is technology a luxury or a survival strategy? In this market, it's increasingly survival. This slide shows supply chain and financial pressure. Critical MEP equipment like switchgear and transformers has 50-plus week lead times. That delays commissioning and creates schedule risk. The industry shifts from just-in-time to just-in-case, meaning early procurement and pre-warehousing. Buy American requirements can increase costs on federal projects. On the financial side, subcontractor failures increase due to fixed-price contracts signed before inflation and tighter credit conditions. Now I ask, what happens when a key subcontractor collapses mid-project? The schedule breaks, continuity is lost, and the replacement cost is high. So the teaching takeaway is, modern construction management must manage supply chain and financial risk, not just field production. This slide gives a three-phase outlook. 2025, transition year. 2026, growth return. 2027-2029, elevated infrastructure peak. It suggests interest rates stabilize or decline, private development resumes, and federal infrastructure investment peaks. Now I ask, why does forecasting matter for construction firms? Because staffing, backlog planning, and equipment decisions depend on what's coming next. So the key message is, the industry is expected to recover and stay active through 2029, driven by infrastructure funding. This slide gives contractors three actions. Diversify into public projects, IIJA, IRA, CHIPS. Invest in real-time cost tracking. Prioritize worker retention. Let me ask, why these three? Because volatility is high and margins are tight. Diversification protects backlog. Real-time tracking protects profit. Retention protects productivity. And my teaching question is, in a market with labor shortages and inflation, what is the contractor's real competitive advantage? The ability to deliver reliably while protecting margin. This slide shifts to owners/developers and gives two key strategies. Engage partners early, design assist. Bring GCs and trades in during design to lock pricing and reduce surprises. Pre-purchase critical equipment, especially long lead MEP items, before breaking ground. Now I ask, why are owners being told to act earlier than before? Because waiting creates schedule risk and cost escalation. The overarching principle is simple. Proactive strategy today prevents costly delays tomorrow. This slide summarizes the entire lecture. Public funding stabilizes activity. Labor shortage constrains capacity. Technology transforms productivity. And it ends with a final thought. The future depends on balancing public investment, workforce development, and innovation. So my final teaching question is, if the demand is strong but capacity is constrained, what must the industry improve most? Productivity, through better planning, better people development, and smarter technology adoption? That is the core lesson of this deck.